Hello everyone, welcome to Story Vault YouTube channel. Hope you enjoy the video. Serious. What's an uneasy gut feeling about someone that turned out to be spot on? Story 1. My little sister and I always felt icky around our great uncle. We hated him and tried to be around our cousins or family whenever we could. This was before we were old enough to understand exactly what sexual abuse and molestation was. But we did know our mom had had a sad childhood, and she did whatever she could to protect us, telling us areas we aren't allowed to let people touch. This moment I'm about to tell you is still in my head, and the same goes for my sister and grandma. We were playing baseball on the Atari with our cousin, and we looked into the hallway, and our great-uncle is crawling on his hands and knees beckoning at us. We just knew it was wrong and started screaming, and our cousin started cussing, and my grandmother runs down the hallway and starts beating him up. Turns out he is a convicted molester, and my mother and uncle are just two of many of his victims. Not long after this, he had finally been caught and put in prison. Our family explained to us that they were trying to keep us away from him, and glad we listened to them, and he finally got caught. From what I know, they had to put him in solitary confinement because tons of prisoners kept beating him up and trying to unalive him. Unfortunately, California State let him out due to good behavior, despite him having 39 known victims with 2 who had taken their lives. My mom and 15 of his victims fought to keep him in and lost. He was released 3 years ago and literally had the nerve to try to call my family to ask us to house him. Of course, we had strong words for him. And just to put a cherry on top of the suffering of his victims, my great-grandmother died and left him everything, so now he has a house and money to potentially continue his horrible behavior. My mother has done her best to cope with the trauma, and we're always there to support her. The other victims sadly do not contact us, so we don't know how they're doing. All we can hope for is that karma gets him someday, and his victims eventually get justice. Story 2. In junior high, grade 7 to 9, we had a special ed program for kids with disabilities. There was this one teacher there who also coached volleyball. A lot of us got the creeps from him, and would often call him a perv. Well, turns out years later when I was in high school, grade 10 to 12, he was caught in the school gym making a special ed student sit on his crotch. Made the news. Last I heard, he got jail time. Edit. Did not expect this to be so common for people. It's terrible. Comment. Dude, my P.E teacher in freshman year gave us girls the creeps too. He'd make us exercise and run laps while the guys got to sit there and watch. He'd play with our hair and accidentally come into our locker room. I started getting angry, and we'd report it, and no one did anything about it. That is, until a middle school girl overheard me on the bus and went to her principal, where they called in police to investigate, and he got caught trying to undress a student in the locker room against her will. They finally fired him and replaced him with a better teacher. I'm glad to see these bad P.E teachers getting caught. Story 3. Our neighbors had an older lady who lived with them, never left the house, and was always in the kitchen working. They spun the story that she was their mother/their children's grandmother, and she lived with them to help around the house. We took this at face value, but it never seemed right. They would go away for a month every year, and she would be left in the house, not allowed to leave for the month they were away. It sounds terrible now, but we actually affectionately nicknamed her the slave, because she seemed to always be working around the house. Turns out they brought her over on a 3-month visa, didn't allow her to leave, and held her a slave in their house for 8 years. Our, now ex-neighbors have both just been found guilty of holding a slave for 8 years and various other charges. Edit. To clarify where I am from, this is not common. My neighbors were the first prosecution of a domestic slavery case. Story 4. My sister's father-in-law. When I met him, I was probably around 13. He always creeped me out and wanted a hug from me when our families would have to be around each other for events, and I never wanted to be around him. Found out years down the road that he was in jail a long time ago for forcing himself to his own daughter when she was a child. His wife stayed with him too. I try my best to stay away from my brother-in-law's whole family as much as possible. 5. Deleted. When I was 17 to 19, I worked at this neighborhood pizza shop. There was this tall, skinny guy with braids that was always coming in really late at night, even if he didn't end up buying anything. That by itself was weird, but it was his vibes more than anything. The way he'd either stand outside or come inside and sit down, then just watch me the whole time. Nothing ever really happened outside of that until one night when I ended up in the shop all by myself because the other workers had either skipped out on their shifts early, were out on a delivery, or had stepped out the back for a smoke. All of a sudden, he was just there at the door, smirking at me like he had me where he wanted me. He threw open the door, stalked up to the counter, leaned so far over it that his face was in mine, and then said, "I'm going to duck you." When I backed up in shock, he continued, saying how he'd been watching me and that I could stop pretending not to be into him because he knew I was just waiting for him to come for me. "Come on, girl. I know you're a freak." He was genuinely surprised and upset when I told him to get out or I'd call the cops. He basically said I better watch my back. I had to stop walking to and from work because of this guy. It was only a 15-minute walk, but with far too little lighting, far too many potential spots to get snatched or hurt. Story 6. A guy would always walk around near my bus stop, never really doing anything, nor going anywhere. Looks like a normal guy, but could never shake the feeling that something was off about him. And then last week, actually the guy attempted to rob my ass. Pretty shit job at it though. Man asked if I had any money on me, and what phone I had. I tell him cuz honestly my phone is kinda shit and who carries any good amount of money to the bus. He then proceeds to flash his gun and say, "If you were lying I would have had to hurt you." Then he walked off. Haven't seen him since. What pissed me off more was that my bus late by an hour. Story 7. Friend of a friend. Dude gave me the creeps. He was nice enough, and was like well kept and like there wasn't anything I could put my finger on about him. He didn't smile weird or anything like that. I just felt uncomfortable around him. He would always tell people he was a male feminist, which I thought cool enough. Was always using that as his shtick around the punk house he lived in with a bunch of other people. Anyway, eventually it turned out the dude was a serial rapist. Someone called him out, and then other women kept coming forward. He would tell women it was cool to sleep in his room because he was a feminist and didn't drink. Turns out it wasn't safe to sleep his room. At last check, he forced himself to 9 women. He got the shit kicked out of him and skipped town. Story 8. One of my friends would always do weird stuff to people's drinks as a joke, like put pepper in someone's Coke at a restaurant when they got up to go to the bathroom, or even spit in someone's water at bonfire. Stuff like that. And I always thought it was super weird his fixation on messing with people's drinks. He had done shit like this since he was 7 when we met. Everyone knew not to leave your drink unattended around him, cause he would duck with it. Long story short, it turns out one of our buddies caught him trying to put something in a girl's drink, and he got the shit beat out of him. Super weird. We literally would joke as kids that he was going to be the creepy guy at the bar putting roofies in people's beer. Story 9. Years ago, my then-husband was talking to one of our new neighbors. He introduced me to him. I only said hello and walked back to the house. My husband came in and said he thought I was a bit ignorant. I said I didn't care as the guy gave me the creeps. About a year later, we found out he was sentenced to 10 years. He has forced himself to his daughter for a number of years. Turned out his grandson was his son. I knew my gut feeling was right. He was a duckin' creep. Story 10. Had a new guy start working at our job, and he was very charming, personable, friendly. Me and another coworker were the only people who didn't get a good vibe from him. Everyone else thought he was great. We come from toxic/abusive childhoods and pick up a lot of cues, things he said, overly friendly, etc. He had everyone feeling bad for him cause he wasn't able to see his daughter. Badmouthing his BM. He stopped coming into work. Turns out he got arrested for breaking a restraining order that he got for physically abusing his BM. He was almost textbook narcissistic and manipulative abuser. Charmed everyone, and everyone was shocked when they heard the truth. Me and my other coworker knew our wariness was right. Story 11. I worked at an elementary school for a while with a seemingly really nice principal. He was really great with the kids and the whole staff loved him. I got called in for a meeting about one of my students on day, and for some reason got super uncomfortable being in an enclosed room alone with him, which had never happened up until that point. I couldn't put my finger on it, so I blamed it on my past trauma and got through the meeting. A couple months later, he got fired and arrested for jerking off to young women in semi-public. Thankfully, no kiddie stuff was involved, and, to my knowledge, he never hurt any children. Story 12. When I was in grade 9, I sat beside this one kid in French class. I was quiet, awkward, and liked to be noticed as little as possible. This kid was brash, loud, easily agitated, always in trouble, was popular but also always gave me weird and off vibes. He was the type of kid that you looked in the eye and could just tell there was something off with him. I vividly remember him always barging into class late, loudly singing children's songs and nursery rhymes while striding to the back, before the teacher either threw him out or waited for him to settle down. Everyone always laughed and thought he was a jokester. I nervously tried to have him notice me as little as possible, while also trying to stay on his good side in case he ever snapped and did something. Fast forward 10 years and this guy's made national news for allegedly strangling his girlfriend's 9-month-old child to death. He's actually still on trial, claiming that he didn't do anything and he found the child unresponsive. There's a mountain of evidence against him. There's absolutely no way I believe him. Story 13. Oh boy, here we go. Had a teacher in high school that just pinged me as something very wrong, but not enough for me to say something. Always asked around about him, but no one had a bad thing to say about him. Turns out he was sleeping with a student the entire time she was in high school. They came clean about it once she graduated, was 18 and pregnant. He was 35. They got married and had 3 kids before he got caught sleeping with a 15-year-old and got arrested. Like I said, something about him just didn't sit right. I knew something was wrong, but couldn't quite put my finger on it. So, that's the end of the video. Hit the like button and subscribe. Have a good day and see you in the next video.